Hi everyone, this is a review of our last lesson, and today we're going to be looking at page 14 in the lesson book. Before we do that, we had a new warm-up exercise that we introduced in this lesson, and it uses the D major scale. If you don't remember the D major scale yet, it's at the bottom of page 11. I think it's exercise number 32, but remember the D major scale is just starting on low D, or open D string, and playing every single note we know in between until we get to the high D note. And so D major scale, start on low D, play to high D, and you can go up and down, although this week we only worked on going up. And the fun warm-up that we did this week was called a silly scale. So in lessons, normally I'll have two students each pick a different type of food, and that food combination is what we make each note say in the scale. Okay, so if it was pepperoni pizza, every time we played a note in the scale, we'd go pepperoni pizza, or short, 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 long, long. It sounds like this when you play it on just one note. Then you can imagine going up to each note all the way into a high D. And like I said, this week we're just working on going up. So when you do your silly scales, you can just come up with the combination on your own. You could ask mom or dad or brother or sister to come up with them with you. You could even write down different food names and put them in a little jar and pick them out, and those two. And the fun thing about doing that is sometimes it's things that sound good and sometimes it's things that sound not very good. Like the example I said in our lesson was that one time someone came up with grape tacos, which sounds kind of yucky. But let's go and do the pepperoni pizza D major scale, silly scale, starting on open D, going all the way up to high D, and we're going to stop there. We will practice going backwards starting next week. So pepperoni pizza, ready, and here we go. Awesome. So again, a great way to get that scale down, to know where your fingers are supposed to go, to memorize it. I did say I want every student to have this memorized by next week. It's not a super difficult pattern to memorize, and so it should be something that we all should be able to do without looking by our next lesson. So now let's take a look at page 14, and I told students when we did this lesson and they were flipping to page 14, I said, don't freak out when you get there, because it looks very different than any of the other pages we played. And that's because on page 14 is where the letter names inside the notes officially go away, where they're not going to be back ever again. And so we've done our time. We had a few months of having the letters inside the notes. Now they're gone. And most students that I've seen so far have found that the transition is actually not too bad. They were able to go to not having the notes, and for the most part, we're able to still read the notes with a couple of little challenges here and there. But the nice thing is this page has some helps. So the first thing is in the top of page 14, there's the yellow box. And if you were not in your lesson, you'll have a little bit of work to do to catch up. But in our lesson, we filled out the note names under each of those notes in that yellow box. So this is kind of a help, because these are the only notes that you're going to have for a while. We're not going to learn new notes for quite some time. And so if you ever need to check and say, I'm not sure what that note is, you can go back to the top of page 14 and compare what line, what space it's on, and that'll tell you what note it is. We also realized that the yellow box is just the D major scale. So it starts on open D, it ends on high D, and it has every note in between. So kind of cool connection with the silly scales that we played. And so then our homework this week, we just had two things, because I do recognize it's a little more challenging not having the notes, and it might take some more time for some students. And so the first was number 40, Carolina Breeze. And so let's take care of that right now. This is just a one-liner, and it was pretty simple. Most students did well with it. What I would recommend doing, since this is, again, some new stuff that we've never done before, I would first go through and read the note names. Make sure that you're solid, because I would never expect you to be able to play something without knowing what's written on the page. So we're going to go through, read the note names. Then I would recommend, if you're still struggling with the bow, which some students are, do it pizzicato. make sure that you have the left hand stuff down, then add the bow. So that's what I'm going to do with number 40. So I'm going to go through, read the note names. We're going to skip the repeat sign, but when you're doing it at home, you're welcome to repeat. So here we go, number 40 with the note names. G, G, F sharp, E, E, D, rest. G, G, F sharp, E, F sharp, G. So you should be able to recognize this is only on the D string. We don't ever go to the A string. And a lot of double notes. The last measure was the one that gave a lot of students a hard time because it's 3 notes and you have to change in between each one. But let's do this pizzicato. I'll put my bow down. And we will pluck, make sure we have these notes down. So setting down, if you do put down fingers for the note G, everyone except for bass does. Put down those fingers for G. And here we go. 1, 2, here we go. G. Back to G. Okay, if you got that, we can move on to the next step. If you didn't, this is a good spot to pause and practice at pizzicato until you have it down. But once you have that down, this one is not too bad to add the bow to because you don't ever have to switch strings. You're on the D string the whole time. So set those 3 fingers down, or fingers for whatever number of fingers you need for the note G. It is different for everyone. 1, 2, here we go. Awesome. Very good. Okay, number 41. A lot of students were excited about having this in the book, Jingle Bells. The way that they have structured this lesson book, normally if you start right in September, you get to Jingle Bells around the beginning of December and have time to work on it before Christmas. We started late this year because I was out, but also we took some time to do some other things, Peru Blue Boogie and stuff like that, so we did not quite make it in time. So I said students are welcome to do Jingle Bells on their own, but that's not going to be part of the homework. Instead, we're going to do number 42. Let me just get there in my book. Number 42, Old Macdonald Had a Farm. You can see this is a 3-liner. So there's 3 lines of music, but it actually is technically a 4-liner because at the top, on the top line at the end of the line, there is a repeat sign. So when you play this piece, you're going to play the top line and then repeat it. So the top line twice, then the second line, then the third line. And we actually learned this backwards. We did the last line first, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But let's look at the bottom line, the third line of Old Macdonald Had a Farm. Let's read our notes together. So 1, 2, here we go. G, 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 D, E, E, D, rest. B, B, A, G, rest, rest, rest. Good. So again, we were talking about last time, we said, oh, this is all on the D string, that makes it easier. This is now on 2 different strings. So it's on the D and A string, unless you're a bass, and then it's on the D and G string, because your strings are a little bit different. But we're dealing with 2 different strings. For right now, I'm going to play it with the bow, but if you're struggling, if you need to do a pizzicato, please do that. We actually had lesson groups where half the kids played it with their bow and the other half played it with pizzicato, and it is okay with me if you have to do some things pizzicato to start, just because this is some tough stuff. So I'm going to play through the third line right now, the bottom line. So 1, 2, here we go. Over to B. Awesome. One of the hardest things for a lot of students on violin, viola, and cello was crossing from those 2 A's, open A's, to the G. And so as you play those open A's, you really have to have your 3 or 4 fingers hovered over so you can just set them down. If they're out here and you're not ready, it's going to take you forever to get your fingers back in place. So that's the bottom line. we're getting to the point in our lessons where there's some things that are going to be challenging, that are going to take some practice, and you're not going to be perfect at them the first try, and that's okay. I want to encourage you to make sure that you are practicing, and sometimes I'll have students come back and they'll say, well, I didn't practice because it was too hard. That's even more of a reason to practice, because if you don't practice and it was too hard, you're just going to get more and more behind. So I want to encourage students to take the time to practice. If you can't do it right now, just do one measure at a time and you will get it, I promise. So that's the third line. The cool thing about it is if you look at the first line, at the top line, it is almost identical. And we learned the bottom line first because it is a little bit simpler. The one difference in the top line is at the very, very end of the fourth measure, there is a D on the last beat instead of a rest. And so that is sort of like what we haven't learned this yet, but it's called a pickup. It's a note that belongs to the next measure. And so it feels a little awkward to play that, but if you just follow the music exactly how it's written, it's not going to be that bad. And I'll show you in a minute what it all sounds like when it comes together. So by learning the third line, you basically learned the top line minus that open D, which everyone can play open D. So now let's look at the middle, the second line. And again, this is not hard actually. Most students said, wait, didn't we play this like our first week? And they're right. This was the G tune where you just put 3 fingers down or 4 fingers, depending on what instrument you play, and you just played a bunch of G's. And that's basically what this is, except at the very, very end there is an open D. And so this is a great exercise to make sure that you are following along with each note. You're watching your music, not just playing it by ear, but you're looking at each note as you play it, and you're ready to go when that D comes. And we actually practiced that. I didn't even play, I just played along on the piano, and we would watch to see how many students, and normally actually it was all of them, they did a nice job, were able to play that D at the right time. Not one note too early, not one note too late. So here's what that middle line sounds like. We're not going to read the notes because it's all G with one D. So I think everyone can handle this. So here we go. If you need to put fingers down, go ahead and do that. 1, 2, here we go. Rest. Rest. Okay, so you see if you're following along with that, you'll be able to play that D at the correct time. Now, this is something I would learn at piece together like that, so I would learn the bottom line, then the middle line, then the top line, then I would put it all together. Right now, and I don't expect anyone to be here yet because most of you just had your lesson either yesterday or last Thursday, so maybe those Thursday people are feeling a little bit better about it. But right now, we're going to play through, I'm going to play through the whole thing. But if you can't do it, I want you to just follow along, hear what it's supposed to sound like, and then this is something to be working on this week before we come back for our next lesson. And I'm hoping that most students will be able to play all or part of this for the next lesson. Okay, so here is 42. So 1, and by the way, I'm going to play it just slightly faster because it sounds like Old Macdonald when you do it a little bit faster. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Rest, use the repeat. Rest. Rest, rest. 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 So that's the challenge of the week. I know this one is really tough, but if everyone takes some time, maybe 3 or 4 times this week to practice this, I have a feeling that most students will be able to have this down for next time. So keep working hard, and we'll see you at your next lesson.